Brandis, President Joe Biden spoke earlier today about the official end of the 20-year war in Afghanistan. Here is some of what he said.
I was not going to extend this forever war, and I was not extending a forever exit. The decision to end the military airlift operations at Kabul airport was based on the unanimous recommendation of my civilian and military advisors.
And joining us to talk about the military's pullout from Afghanistan and more is Congressman Rodney Davis, a Republican from Taylorville who is the ranking Republican on the Committee on House Administration. We invited a number of Democrats from the Illinois delegation to join us, but they declined our invitation. Congressman Davis, thank you for being with us. You heard the president there. He has defended ending this war after 20 years, and he has defended the execution of the withdrawal. Do you agree with his assessment?
Absolutely not. I think President Biden and his administration completely own the botched execution of this plan. It was a plan that we have seen has had deadly consequences for our brave men and women in the U.S. military. And this will go down as one of the worst decisions made by any president in American history.
Which decision? The decision to end the war or how it was done?
The execution of this plan was abysmal. We have billions of dollars in military equipment in the hands of the Taliban. His own military leaders have questioned that vote of unanimity, but he is the commander-in-chief. He owns this. And frankly, when you look at what's happened in Afghanistan, we as leaders have to educate the American people as to what is the best plan of action in anything we do. And I think it would have been easy for him and his administration to talk about having a force of 2,500 rotating American military personnel in Afghanistan to keep the embassy open, to keep Bagram Air Base, and to be that force maximizer to the Afghan military and the Afghan government. Instead, he pulled out. Their entire administration miscalculated, and Afghanistan is now under the control of the Taliban, and they have more provinces today than they did on September 10th of 2001.
Now, the president says that there was unanimous consent that the Afghan security forces would be able to hold longer than they did. Were there any credible voices saying the opposite, planning for a worst-case scenario that occurred?
Well, let me just say, I've been in top security briefings, top level that I can't talk about here, and I will tell you, I didn't get the indication that there was unanimity that there wasn't going to be disastrous consequences. However, I can't speak about the details, but in the end, he's the commander-in-chief. He makes the final decisions with military leaders, and their job is to go execute those orders. They executed those orders. And frankly, now Congress, in a bipartisan way, needs to do its job, and we need to conduct oversight. We need to bring these military leaders in front of congressional panels, have Republicans and Democrats ask these questions. The American people deserve to know the answers.
So you're calling for congressional inquiries into how this drawdown was handled?
Yeah, there's absolutely no reason that Chairman Smith of the Armed Services Committee and also other committees of jurisdiction, there's no reason they shouldn't bring in military leaders and ask them why this decision was made and ask them why their planners were so wrong into thinking that the Afghan government would be able to sustain itself when their entire security apparatus was built upon our forces and our air power being force maximizers.
There are still reports that there are between 100 and 200 Americans left in Afghanistan. The Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, said there will be diplomatic channels to help get some of these folks out that want to come out. What is the diplomatic leverage here the U.S. has?
Zero, because the Biden administration has botched this so badly. We have no leverage over the Taliban. And I cannot believe that the Biden administration staged a photo op acting like the last American out was the general in charge when we have hundreds of Americans still there. This, again, because of issues like this, will go down in American history as one of the worst decisions a president has ever made.
Congressman, we've spoken with a lot of refugee and immigrant groups here that are worried about the Afghans that remain there, those that assisted the United States. Not only them, but their families. They say that all of them are in danger of being killed by the Taliban. What can you do? What can Congress do to assist in their evacuation and resettlement potentially here in the United States?
Well, my office has dealt with some of the special immigrant visa requests. My office has been engaged in making sure that families of Americans and those who supported our American efforts were able to get out. But the bottom line is there are no Americans that are there to safely evacuate any of these Americans or any of the Afghan interpreters who have risked their lives in helping our military. It's a shame. It didn't have to be this way. But President Biden and his administration made sure that their lives and their ability to get here safely and work through diplomatic channels are severely challenged right now.
But the fact that there are still so many Afghans and several dozen Americans, does it mean that there has to be some kind of diplomatic channel with the Taliban to ensure their safety?
Several dozen. There are hundreds of American citizens still stuck, and that's just the number that's reported. Let's not downgrade that it's dozens, because one is too many, Paris. But when you look at the Taliban, the Biden administration has already decided to provide diplomatic efforts with the Taliban when they allow the Taliban to provide security in Kabul. They gave up Kabul to the Taliban, and they've already created an opportunity for the Taliban to view themselves as a legitimate part of the global society. And that is just amazing to me that the president still does not take any blame for how badly this entire situation was botched that led to the deaths of 13 brave Americans.
And to be fair, Congressman, I should mention the former presidential administration did negotiate with the Taliban, did negotiate an initial withdrawal deal and an initial timeline. I want to move to domestic politics because before this transpired, there was an infrastructure bill that you were helping negotiate. It passed the Senate. What's the status of that in the House right now?
Well, there really is no status. The Speaker has decided to call for a vote sometime at the end of September. My colleagues, who many of them are my friends on the moderate side of the Democratic Party, they caved. They decided to vote for the rule to allow the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that will bankrupt our family farms from being transferred to the next generation by the heinous tax changes that are being proposed. And really, what it's done is allowed the progressives to really have the leverage. And they have now said that they will not vote on any infrastructure bill unless it's closely attached to the $3.5 trillion reconciliation that includes their liberal wish list.
So does that imperil the chances in the House? I mean, is it any consensus on a roll call at this point for that bill, for the $1 trillion infrastructure bill?
No, there's zero consensus, or they would have had it. As a matter of fact, the Speaker could call that piece of legislation up any day, right? Any day she wants. We were in D.C. She could have put it on the floor. She chose not to, which tells me that she's doing everything that the far left progressives in that wing of the Democratic Party want. And they're trying to leverage a very popular title of infrastructure to pass a $3.5 trillion wish list that they've now self-titled human infrastructure. If you are a taxpayer in the state of Illinois, be very concerned when my Democratic colleagues in Washington begin to rationalize what is infrastructure and what is not. We know what it is. And Democrats are trying to make sure that they try to fool you into spending trillions more.
All right, Congressman Rodney Davis, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Paris. Take care.